Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review the first season, first episode of American Gods. So, when going into this show, I ended up just kind of randomly, like I was watching some other movie, and then I was watching an ad. All of a sudden, it told me about this show. Consistently saying the word shadow in the trailer. It seems like there was consistently shadow. I'm like, what does it say shadow? I'm confused. I went into this show and I was like, you know what? There's something about this that like I could connect with bizarrely. And then it said American God. I'm like, okay, so what is this about? What is this about? I know there's been shows like American Gothic, and there's been other stuff like that maybe is quasi going to be like this at the end of the day. Um, there's probably going to be other shows that are going to be just like this probably at some point, like supernatural-ish like things. So, I mean, going into this, there is a lot of characters that are in this show because it comes down to a bunch of skits that are all seemingly going to, I'm assuming at some point, all commingle together. We have some interesting supernatural characters. We have a character that seems to know everything about everyone and is making deals, but he's not, like, seemingly at this point going to say that he's the devil. Just call him Mr. Wednesday. You have a person that is seemingly narrating everything that is called Mr. Abyss. You have a leprechaun in this show, which I found weird. I know the guy that plays the leprechaun. I know him from Orange Is the New Black, and I was like, oh, good for him. He's doing another role, and plus he had an Irish accent the entire time, which I thought was cool. Because leprechaun, so it was kind of funny how they made a joke about that. So we also have some ties to a character that I don't think is completely 100% tied to the actual Marvel character Low-Ki, because low and key are two words, but I think that's probably what I will call him for this time. Evidently, we had Bill Murray's brother, which he was on the show. I can't find exactly where that is, but I know I've seen him on plenty of other kinds of things. I know he's Bill Murray's brother, so I'll just probably call him Murray. Sadly enough. I think I saw him on Still Standing, or maybe there was some other sitcom that he was on at some point. So I'm backpedaling. So going into this show, we have also a character named Audrey, which I was like, wow, she's from Glow. All right, every single time you go further and further into this show, the more surprised you'll get. And this show consistently delivers shock value. Within the first episode, you're gonna whoa! What's going on within this thing? Good grief! If you want to say, Walking Dead has shock value, it's got nothing on this show, to be brutally honest. Good grief. There was some stuff where I was like, oh my god. What is going on? And then, there was some times where I was, coming up with the consensuses of what was going on, that, somebody was either getting seemingly consumed from within, or there were just weird moments where I'm just like, okay, so is is this main character Shadow Moon, is he going to seemingly be like the sad song that never ends? To where every single time someone tells him it's going to go this exact way, that is the way it's going to end up. So there are surprising things, but there are times where basically characters will basically look you in the face, or look the main character in the face and tell them exactly how things are going to go, and they are going to have to be fine with it ultimately. So there is some odd visual things going on into this show, and I just don't quite understand how it quite connects yet. Because first episode, reasonably, I'm hoping things are going to consistently get flushed out. We're probably not going to know who exactly Mr. Wednesday is until the very end, because I'm assuming that this character is going to be heavily mysterious. So ultimately, we're just going to have to tie ourselves onto the show and keep going on to this, because I want to consistently keep coming back to the show and watch it, because I was just godsmacked through this first episode. If you want to say the word of the title in here, yeah, I was just like, wow, this show's pretty cool. It is. There's some stuff that like technically like I didn't quite understand, but it's interesting how they break things down to where it's basically telling somebody like, yeah, don't do this or this is going to happen to you while things are going on, as a prequel like thing. So we have in this show that Mr. Wednesday is helping us tell you where this guy's life is going to head. Because really, Shadow Moon says nothing. Every single support character. Let me pause here. Every single, like, not only Mr. Wednesday, but seemingly every supporting character is going to tell you where Shadow Moon's character is going to go. They're basically like laying it out for you. Shadow Moon himself doesn't know, like basically someone will be there to just like tell him, it's like, yeah, this is what actually happened. When you weren't here, this is what happens. Or hey, this is where your life is going. Here's the boot, kick you out. So let's go into the spoilers of this show, because there is some stuff that people might, through this review of this episode, might not understand, or just like, yeah, I need to see this show because this show is odd via the way he describes it. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. About that time again, do spoil this episode. Yeah, I was just like, wow, with this. I thought it was fun. So, man, like Moon Shadow to me felt like Mad Max, but a better version, where Mad Max, like, don't mess with this guy. Don't mess with Shadow Moon, because he's freaking awesome. So we ultimately start out with this kind of wise tale in the beginning of this, narrated by this character called Mr. Abyss, which I thought was weird. Or like, I think his name is IBIS, Mr. Abyss. So he is narrating this story, telling us about these Vikings or barbarians that are coming upon this new land. And all the while they're coming onto this new land, basically they are thinking, oh my god, this is the promised land. Oh man, this is going to be amazing. Believe me. Like, we're going to get all kinds of women because of this new land. We're going to get everything that we've ever wanted, riches and blah, blah, blah. So, these, let's just say, Viking-esque people make it onto this new land, start walking up to this new land, and all of a sudden, just one person is getting hit with 100 arrows throughout his entire body. And we're just like, what? What is this? What is this? What's going on? I'm confused. So, it seems like these arrows came out of absolutely nowhere. It doesn't make sense. Basically, one of the other Vikings end up walking up to this person and end up getting shot with 100 arrows from out of nowhere as well. Dead. Dropping. So, there is no human being who could shoot arrows like that. Especially during this time. So, they naturally assume, the Vikings, that it's not, like, if anything, they have to appease their god to ultimately sacrifice for this land. It's not like they're going to easily get this land that easily. What they end up doing is, like, sacrificing one of their clan members. They end up, like, burning him alive. They start sacrificing things from people, like poker and eye. Yeah. Every single one of the clan's members loses an eye, sight and it just goes on and on, to the point where they think that all the Vikings have to battle one another in a war to appease their god, but absolutely nothing works, because they have this thing of, like, a bag of sand that they tie onto these two pieces of wood, and when the sand kind of like twists in the wind, like, they're thinking that this isn't going to appease their, like, they're trying to figure out whether this is going to appease their god or not. And it doesn't. So eventually, instead of going on to this new land, they eventually, with however wounded and whoever is left, they just leave. They just leave this land because there's no way to appease their god. And so they leave. So now, we have one other scene that is not going to make sense yet in this show, but it is there, and I will talk about this one because it doesn't have a true connection to this show, and then we're going to get into the Shadow Moon full story, because these are two stories that don't quite connect and don't quite make sense. So we have this. We have a actor that I'll call Murray. Ultimately, he meets a woman who's called Bilquis. Yeti-eyed Badaki? I'm gonna pronounce. I'm sorry, I pronounced. I try. That's the actress's name, and I butchered that. I'm sorry. Bilquis. Let's say that. So this is a woman that is seemingly meeting Murray, and which is actor's name, they're going on a date together, and ultimately Murray is saying to her, it's like, man, I can't believe this is going so well. I can't believe the date between us is going so well. Surefire enough, like, these two people are just kindred spirits. And to the point to where eventually they get further on to have this date go so well. Because ultimately we have Murray's character who is basically like, man, I'm so happy that I ended up like having my kids like put me on this dating site and this and that. I'm so happy about all this. And so reasonably, Bilquis ends up taking Murray by the hand to go into some bedroom business. The only problem is the more and more Murray's character gets, let's just say, happy about this business, the more and more we start to lose sight of Murray's character, let's just say. To the point to where he completely becomes much more and more consumed. Like, there's some interesting camera angles, and there's some interesting, like the more and more this starts to happen, I'm like, what is, like, is he actually, like, shrinking? Is he, like, growing more and more? Like, what? Like, what is going on? And then I'm like, oh, he's vanishing little by little, and he doesn't even realize it. Wow. So this must be some kind of, like, demon-like thing that ultimately kind of, like, consumes someone. Which I was like, wow, that's crazy. So, I don't know how any of this stuff connects to Shadow Moon, but eventually I'm assuming we'll get there. Because, okay, dokie. So, now let's go into the story of Shadow Moon. So, Shadow Moon is a guy that is in prison that ultimately is talking to this character that we won't find out in this episode, but he will be at some point called Low Key. 2 words, not one. So he is talking to this guy in prison. Bizarrely, when Shadow Moon gets out of prison, also bizarrely will Loki at the same time, which I don't think is a coincidence. So we have Loki talking to Shadow Moon, and like basically Shadow Moon's time in prison is almost up. Loki is kind of like talking about him, or talking to him. Ultimately, Loki eventually talks him about that if you're ever going to an airport and trying to get a ticket for any flight, don't get angry or don't get upset with the person that is booking your flight. Like, you're basically going to end up right into prison if you do that. And funny enough, Shadow Moon gets released early because there is a death within his family. His wife is dead. And so he eventually goes to try to make it to his wife's funeral. So he is desperately calling his best friend, which he doesn't realize is dead. He calls like frantically, just like, dude, I need a ride, like, please help me. He evidently has a burner phone or a cell phone. He has just enough money for that. But he is basically just at this airport, just sleeping until his plane arrives. He's falling asleep, waiting for his plane, because that's all. Like, basically, his flight out is the only like money that he really has left in his savings. So Shadow Moon eventually goes on the flight, and the first person that eventually he meets is Mr. Wednesday. That seemingly eventually they like make deals for upgrades and stuff like that to where they're getting better treatment. Uh, Seemingly, Mr. Wednesday is letting Shadow Moon like sip off of his drink, and funny enough, like Shadow Moon's like, "Dude, you're giving me your drink," and Mr. Wednesday's just like, "Dude, like." I'm giving you liquid here, and you look like that, like I slapped you in the face, or I farted on you. Like, here you go, buddy. Like, I know you want this. Mr. Wednesday and Shadow Moon like talk about like both of them like that Shadow Moon knew that Mr. Wednesday like conned them into an upgrade seat, and like bravo for him for doing that. Like, bravo for like how it seems that Shadow Moon is looking at Mr. Wednesday as a con artist, or a guy that can work people. Ultimately, at some point, Shadow Moon, or eventually Mr. Wednesday knows the name of this person, Shadow Moon. And then when Shadow Moon asks who Mr. Wednesday is like, well, what day of the week is it? And Shadow Moon says Wednesday. It's like, well, that's me. That's who I am. Cryptically, like, basically, like, mentioning to Shadow Moon that he's had a number of different names, but ultimately, like, just call him Mr. Wednesday. So, weirdly enough, so eventually Shadow Moon eventually goes into, like, he goes off the plane. He eventually like still can't contact his friend. He ends up having to desperately try to make it to his wife's funeral, and every single time that he's thinking that he's going to make it there, that he's going to be able to walk as far as he can, every single time there is just more walking to do. Like, there's an endless amount of walking that he's doing, and he's just like, oh, like, come on, like there's no other way to get here. There's no other way to, like, there's miles upon miles of me just walking to get to where I need to finally see my wife. Pushing on to eventually get Shadow Moon into a bar where eventually Mr. Wednesday is there. Taking a whiz in the bathroom, bizarrely, because he's standing up. Pops out of the stall, and basically like tells him like, hey, like, I'm here again. And Shadow Moon's just like, okay, I can understand the whole like plane thing, but like I don't quite understand how you're here at this bar. Like, are you stalking me? Because ultimately Mr. Wednesday was asking about a job for Shadow Moon to do, and Shadow Moon refused. So Mr. Wednesday is like, you know what? I'm going to make you take this deal. You are flat broke. You have like every single thing that you think that you have is completely gone. Because he ultimately shows him his best friend and his wife are both dead on a newspaper. And so he looks at it and he's like, oh my god. So there's a reason why I couldn't get to my friend. There's a reason why I couldn't call anybody, because the people that I know most are dead. So ultimately, Shadow Moon goes, okay, how about we just go by pure luck now? I flip a coin, and reasonably, if it comes up, you want heads, I want tails. Ultimately, if it comes up coin flip, then I'm all yours. If it comes up heads, and ultimately he flips the coin, catches it, and he goes, yeah, it's gonna come up tails because it's always gonna come up tails because it's a trick coin. You. And so Mr. Wednesday says, I bet it's heads. How much you want to bet? What you want to bet? Ultimately, Shadow Moon flips it over, and it is heads. And he's like, how is that possible? This is a trick coin. He keeps flipping it, and every single time it comes up heads. Every single time. Even though it's a trick coin. So he's baffled by this. So ultimately, we have Mr. Wednesday that's like, okay, like, you're going with me. You're going to do this. Eventually Mr. Wednesday will give him a car, but we'll get to that. So we have this leprechaun who is a very tall man, red-headed, show up and basically like, oh, you're into coin tricks, huh? You're into coin tricks. Well, how about I show you some tricks of my own? Basically, we consistently have this leprechaun-esque like guy consistently doing every single coin trick seemingly imaginable, to where like he's like coming out of coins out of seemingly everywhere. And ultimately Shadow Moon is like, okay, how are you doing all of this? Do you just have like coins like sewn into your sleeve kind of thing? And he's like, yeah, I wish it was that simple, right? No, this guy is like consistently like flipping coins into like drinks. He's like coming up with coins out of anywhere, like pulling coins out of his ear, pulling coins out of Shadow Moon's ear and everything, and just dropping like non-stop coins everywhere. And the leprechaun is basically telling Shadow Moon, it's like, dude, like, you don't know who this person is. You're making a crappy deal. You're stupid. So basically, the leprechaun is going and he's like, you know what? Like, how about right here in this bar, I fight you? I'm going to win. I know I'm going to win, but I just want to fight you. I just want to let's get this out of the way. Let's kind of just, like, I think I'm just here to fight you because ultimately you're a simple coin trick and me like going out of my way to be your better, and then eventually like basically consistently like mocking you, making fun of you, and ultimately telling you that like I'm your better consistently is starting to like, Shadow Moon is just like poker face like 24/7, but the leprechaun is trying to figure out a way to get him to fight him. He's ultimately trying to figure some way to fight this guy, whether like touching him or just something to get him. So the leprechaun eventually is just kind of sitting around or standing around. You have Wednesday bringing drinks to everybody, and then ultimately Shadow Moon will basically like tell, or Mr. Wednesday will tell Shadow Moon, hey, if you drink all these drinks, then the deal is set. Because there's like this weird liquid that Shadow Moon eventually drinks. He's trying to sniff it, he can't figure out what it is. So he drinks it and he's like, well, yeah, that's weird. Some weird stuff there. And Mr. Wednesday says it's the drink of the gods. So really eventually it just gets to the point to where the Leprechaun eventually keeps egging on Shadow Moon, eventually to the point of like, hey, what is this newspaper here? Is this woman that's on this newspaper your wife? And immediately, once Leprechaun is going to say something about Shadow Moon's wife, Shadow Moon pops him in the face in slow motion. And here's where we start out this fight. Leprechaun takes his coat off and ultimately reveal he has like suspenders and a tank top. So Shadow Moon is like there's this like back and forth like thing. I'm like, is the fight going to be guaranteed that it's going the Leprechaun way, or is it going to be Shadow Moon that is ultimately still going to come out at the end of all of this? Because reasonably, he's the focused character that I think is just going to take out everyone. So we have in here this fight that is going back and forth. This feels like the John Carpenter movie They Live, which was between Roddy Piper and, oh my god, um, ah, IMDb They Live right now, everybody. I might have to do that myself. I know he was in. I know he was in Chronicles of Riddick. I know. Let me pause this. Let me figure it out. Keith David. I'm like, good God. I'm like, I know I played like Saints Row like 3 and like 4 or whatever. Like, or no, it was Saints Row 4. Like, played that a lot. So I'm like, it had. I think I want to say it's like Keith, but I don't remember the last name. So, mood point still, but this fight was going on for a long time. Um, so we have the Leprechaun fighting Shadow Moon, and this is just an amazing brawl. It's going everywhere. Like, I thought that these people probably might have been thrown out, but I guess maybe they're just too big of people. There's no bouncer at this bar, which I thought was confusing. I'm like, why are these people just going at it and nobody's having no never mind about it? I'm a little confused. But anyways, so maybe that's just a thing at bars where eventually like they just don't have any kind of like if a people have to fight then that's what they do. I thought this bar, like the visuals of it, was kind of cool because you have just like this alligator or this like gator like teeth thing, which I thought was a really cool visual for a bar. Man, if they had to create that, that looked freaking awesome. Or if they found a setting that was like that, bravo to them, because that looks awesome. So eventually, it gets to the point to where it feels like, okay, who actually 100% won this fight? Because like the Leprechaun was taking like a bunch of punches to the face, but Shadow Moon just walked off. He just basically stopped and then just walked off. We ultimately have Shadow Moon eventually waking up in a car, ultimately for Mr. Wednesday to tell him this car is his, and ultimately he's taking him to the funeral of his wife. And Mr. Wednesday is basically telling Shadow Moon, it's like, hey, I won't usually tell you this, but take all the time you need. So Shadow Moon eventually goes to the funeral and meets this girl named Audrey, which I will know from the movie The Hunt or the show Glow, which I love the movie The Hunt. If you haven't seen the movie The Hunt, you need to see it. You do. It's awesome. I loved it. It's like, yeah, this movie is like all over the place, and it's great. So Audrey goes into mentioning, it's like, hey, like, it's great that you like Audrey mentions to Shadow Moon. It's like, well, hey, it's great that you forked over all the money for this funeral. Like, isn't it great on you? You gave her like facial reconstruction surgery to make her look good so you can like have her have an open casket and all of this. Like, isn't it great on you that you did all of this? And more, like, Audrey is making Shadow Moon feel like crap, but there's a whole reason for that. Because Audrey eventually mentions, like, you know the reason why she ultimately had to get the reconstructive surgery that she did and why all this had happened? Because my husband and your wife were having an affair together. It's like, oh my God. So reasonably, there's a funeral. Told me Shadow Moon is hitting the button for the coffin of his wife to go down, and it's not quite working. They gotta like hit some buttons to try and just man, this is not going this guy's way. He like sits and sits and sits for seemingly days on end at this person's funeral, and basically we end up finding Autry coming back to Shadow Moon at some point, just going like, hey, like, why are you just sitting around at her grave? Like, because Shadow Moon was sitting at her grave and like trying to figure out why that his wife was cheating on him, and ultimately mentioning all the stuff that he had read about while he was in prison, where there was history. He found out that he actually really did enjoy math and all this stuff. And Autry comes in and she's like, yeah, your wife cheating on you. Yeah, like basically she had my husband's thing in her mouth, if you know what I mean. Like drudging up all this like craziness, drudging up how basically it was just like, man, like viciousness incarnate, telling this man how like she wanted, instead of having her man keep his thing in his grave, she wanted to do something else with his thing. And so, yeah, very cryptically talking about this because I kind of have to, because it's very dark. So these two end up like having this seemingly like fight out. Audrey wants to jump on Shadow Moon because, like, man, you got really like buff in prison. You really worked out. So basically, Audrey is going as much as possible to try to get revenge, and Shadow Moon won't have it. And basically, Audrey is just a mess. She's just a mess. And so, like, he's letting her go, he's letting her talk, and letting her grieve. And I think that is where the most important part of this episode really and truly does end at that point for me, honestly. Is just like two people that were betrayed, but Shadow Moon is trying desperately as much as possible to be a good person about everything out of all of this, and we're waiting eventually for this time for this character to break, and we're assuming that eventually it's going to happen, sadly enough. So yeah, that is my thoughts on American Gods. I want to get out of here because I know it's like 50 minutes, and like a lot of people will tell me like, yeah, shorter review. So that's all I wanted to say. Man, is this episode impactful. I can't wait to do these more, if ultimately I can like watch all these. So I'm going to get out of here. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.